essentially, this is a team we are doing research on in our research team at SAS. Okay, this is actually a topic which is pretty hot for us in the sense that we focus on this research topic since, I would say, a year, a little bit longer, but most of my teammates, they are recent team members. So that's already a first important message. This is not, you know, research which is written in stone. This is research which is ongoing, which is looking at a particularly difficult and highly debated scientific question. What is rationality? What is consciousness? So I will not pretend here to present you the ultimate wisdom. I would like to, but as I said, this is debated research. This is research at the forefront. There are many teams in the world working on it. And well, I will at least try to give you an idea of the research lines, directions we are pursuing, and maybe some of the ideas we already published and so proposed to the scientific community. I will co-teach this with Giacomo, with Aleksey, and with Alexander. So you know that Giacomo is a philosopher, Aleksey a computer scientist, and Alexander an economist. So the main red line in this course is the concept of consciousness. What is it? I will start with a general introduction. I will present you some of the best known theories which are on the market. Not all of them, because there is a huge literature, so I'll have to be selective. Giacomo will go a little bit deeper in some analytic aspects of some of his favorite authors. And the computer scientist, Aleksey, he will delve into the topic of artificial general intelligence. You've all heard of artificial intelligence. You know that's one of the key methods or tools which computer scientists are nowadays trying to implement in computers and robots to make them solve certain tasks. For our team, one of the most interesting questions is, and that's what I'm personally working on, is to answer the question, what is real intelligence and what is therefore real computer intelligence? So one of the most famous answers to that question has been given by Alan Turing, a computer scientist. Does someone know what Turing's answer is? It's actually half of an answer. It's more a method to do research than a real answer. Someone knows Turing's claim about general intelligence, computer intelligence? Turing says that, well, if you want to know whether is that a finger that rises or that scratches the eye. You've heard of Turing's claim? Turing says that, well, you can basically know whether a machine is humanly intelligent when if you do not see the computer, you do not know whether it's a computer or a human that you're talking to, but by asking questions, the answers that you get inform you whether the machine is, well, whether you're talking to a machine or to a human being. In other words, the machine should be able to answer intelligently questions of a human. Now that is, you know, an indirect answer, and we will have much more to say on that question. Alexander will then look at the economic aspects of rationality, and he will try to answer questions such as what is considered rational economics? How can we relate this to real decisions of people? Does the notion of rationality change over time? And what are the limitations of rationality? So this, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to really enjoy this seminar, I propose you here a few questions that I suggest you start pondering about right now, okay? Then you can try to see what the answers that certain philosophers, computer scientists, economists and neuroscientists gave to these questions. But I think it's much more interesting if you're interested in doing research, well then to first try to come up with your own answers. So what do you think is consciousness? What do you think is real intelligence? How, in other words, can we make a computer really intelligent? How can we make it indistinguishable from an intelligent human? And then the next question is, can we make artificial intelligence systems or computers or robots, in other words, machine intelligence, can we make it conscious? Okay, that is the question that I personally am most interested in, but these three questions are clearly related. So this is for the SAS students. They have the pleasure to do some tests. We have an in-class test at the last meeting of week 4, where you will simply be answering a few simple questions about the material seen in class, 45%, so that's a big part. And then we have in week 8, as you can see in the syllabus, another test where you will be asked to make links between the different concepts seen in the first lessons and then the more specific theories of the last lessons. If you have any questions on these tests, and needless to say, you can always ask me in the box or in my office. There is also 10% of the grade which is given to participation. So here are the meeting times. We have the next lecture on Thursday, same time, and the seminar will be on Friday, 4 o'clock. By the way, may I know who are external visitors? Can you please raise your hand if you're an external visitor? Okay. Nice to meet you. And maybe what we could do is you could briefly present yourself just by saying your name. Is that okay? And if you don't mind, then take off your mask.
Only name or something?
Sorry?
Only name?
Name is good, and anything else you would like to add, maybe which field you're most interested in, or whether if you're a student from some discipline, that would be interesting to know. But it's up to you. Just name is fine, just to have a little idea who are the visitors.
My name is Nastya. I'm a student, and I'm here with my friends. So I saw the syllabus when I chose courses for my second year electives, and it seemed interesting for me. That's why I'm here. So.
That's excellent. Welcome. Okay, let us start. I asked to the regular students to read an introductory chapter of a book by Megan Griffith on free will. What I would like to start with is to explain you how we came to studying consciousness and cognition, okay, and rationality. Originally, this team was focusing on free will, but at some point we decided that it might be more interesting to focus on consciousness. So let me give you, together with some students, a brief introduction on the key issues of free will, and then how we move from that to consciousness. As I asked to the students who are subscribed to the course, could you please give maybe Milana a brief introduction of, let's say, the main positions on the free will debate. Milana or Yegor, I ask you guys to participate.
Okay, so basically there are two extremes. Libertarians who claim that we have free will and we are absolutely free to in our decision. And determinists, hard determinists, who claim that everything in the universe is determined, including our actions. And they are compatibilists, who claim that the universe can be deterministic, but we can also have free will. and the main thing is to define what we mean by this concept.
Yeah, that's a very good introduction. Is there anyone who has a question on that? Because I'm just curious to know how deep I should go in explaining where these positions come from. Is there anyone who has, so as Milana correctly said, the two broadest or key schools which are in opposition are on the one hand the people who say, well, you know, my decisions, my so-called free decisions in my brain, ultimately they are all materialized by neurological circuits, by neurons, which are part of the brain, so which are a physical/biological system. And such biophysical systems, they, according to science, they follow certain laws. They're not behaving, you know, just as they wish. They follow the laws of biophysics and of neurobiology. And therefore, you know, where is the free will here? I mean, if, for instance, my decision to lift this bottle here is done, if you like, or materialized by a neural circuit in the brain, and if this neural circuit or the electrochemical activity of the neural circuit has itself a certain cause, since it follows a certain law, then, you know, the circuit that makes me do this is itself determined by another circuit, another event in my brain. For instance, there is a signal coming from neurons which are connected to my stomach and which say to the brain, it's time to drink because you're thirsty. So there is this interaction between neural networks which, you know, make you do something. And, well, one general idea of scientists is that things do not pop up out of the blue. That's one of the key principles of any scientist. Nothing comes from nothing. Things are caused by preceding events. So in this case, many neurobiologists, they say anything we do is predetermined by things happening in the brain. So we have a whole, let's say, chain of events. For instance, here is the event that I make the so-called free decision to pick up the bottle and drink, but that event has a preceding event which causes this one, or maybe there are many preceding events which cause this, but all these events themselves, they have preceding causes, and so on until you arrive at a huge tree which basically ends in the Big Bang some 14 billion years ago. So there are people, and that's a very extreme thought. Many people, of course, disagree, but yet, personally, I have a sympathy for this idea because there are very strong arguments in its favor. Well, then you end up with the idea that free will is an illusion. Okay, so this is the position which is called determinism. Let me show you a little drawing. So on the left hand you have the determinists, and they say, well, in the brain there is only neurobiology, chemistry, physics, which follows iron laws and which links effects to preceding causes, which the causes necessitate the effects by definition of cause, and therefore where is free will here? Everything is necessitated by a chain of events. And actually, most of the neurobiologists, they are on this side, because there are intriguing experiments which seem to indicate that, you know, when we have the feeling to do a free act, that actually this free act is determined by other events. The most famous experiment is the one by Benjamin Libet, and his experiment has shown that when people consciously press a button, actually, he he measured the electroencephalogram of the brain, and he could see that before the conscious decision was made, actually there is, during almost half a second, an intense activity of the brain of which the patient, or the test person rather, is not aware. So there's a huge activity of which people are not aware that's going on in the brain before they make a decision. A more spectacular and more recent experiment is showing that, well, researchers could measure the brain activity with a technique called MRI, and they had a test person in this machine. The test person could choose to lift, for instance, the left hand or the right hand, so either left or right. The person was instructed, you can choose freely left or right, and by looking before the person or during the process of choosing, by looking at the MRI scan of the brain, these researchers could predict 10 seconds before the person made its decision whether they would choose left or right, okay? And with a high statistical reproducibility. So this is very intriguing. I'm not saying that this clearly proves that, free will might be an illusion, that our so-called free acts are actually predetermined and that we are not aware of all these activities in the brain. But there are, especially in the neurobiology camp, many people who privilege this interpretation. The other camp, of course, there are many people, and most people who do not study this scientifically are on the right side. They are libertarians, and they say, no, there is something more than just chemistry and physics in my brain. There is my mind, and my mind is free because I feel I'm free. No doubt, we all feel at every moment free, right? Unless we are put in prison or unless someone has put a gun on our head, most of the time we feel free. And this feeling of freedom is obviously of an immense utility. It's a very useful idea. Biologists could probably easily explain it. They would say, well, yes, this has a biological function. If in ancient times primitive man was attacked by a tiger, and if he would not feel free, if he would think, well, everything is predetermined, then maybe he would not be inclined so fast to run away, right? So what I'm saying is that this feeling of freedom is very functional for human beings, and let's face it, it seems that this idea of determinism has a little touch of fatalism to it, although if you look deeper in the question, that's not true. Now those people who are on the libertarian side and who say, well, there is something more than just my brain, there is the mind, they beg one question, of course. They immediately beg the question, well, then please tell me what is the mind? And that's not an easy question to answer. For neurobiologists, it is slightly more easy. At least they have a ready-made answer. They say, well, the mind is the brain. And all the thoughts, feelings, decisions that go on in your mind are actually neural processes in your brain. But this debate goes on, and of course I will not here pretend to decide between one of these schools. Both have famous proponents. Spinoza and Einstein, they were determinists. Popper, Eccles, and Bohr were libertarians. By the way, there are many quantum physicists who are on the right side, so on the libertarian side, because they say, well, this purely deterministic picture is, invalidated by quantum mechanics, because quantum mechanics is a probabilistic science, and that means that, for every event that happens on the atomic scale, there is not just one outcome which is necessitated, which is sure to happen. Actually, there are several outcomes. So quantum systems are probabilistic systems. According to these people, there might happen things in our brain which are probabilistic, and then this would save, according to those researches, this would save the notion of free will. I remember that you, Yegor, you had a sympathy for that position, correct?
Yes, it is correct. You want me to answer something else?
Maybe you can give some arguments in favor of this idea?
Particularly in favor of idea that free will exists and it is incompatible with determinism.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that free will is incompatible with determinism simply because I prefer the definition of free will, that our free will is the ability to choose our actions, and most compatibilist positions, they define free will differently. And well,
but that's not a very scientific answer, because you're saying, I think it's that because I prefer it.
yeah, basically yes, but I'm not a scientist. And yeah, and definitions, they are more about philosophy than about science. As well.
That's true, yeah.
And speaking about the free will, why do I believe in it? I already told you that many times, so maybe you even remember. And this answer is not very scientific, I admit. I believe in free will because I like to think that I'm free to act however I like. And there is nothing that I've seen that would disprove it. Like that Libet experiment, well, that's really interesting, but there are a lot of objections about this experiment. For example, one of which is their probability is not 100%. Another, that it's not that important, it's not such an important decision to actually reflect on it. The reflection could choose or change the outcome. And there are some others.
True, and so I just asked Yegor to give his opinion just to show that the debate goes on. Okay, so you have arguments on both sides. My main argument against this idea that my brain could be, a probabilistic system is that most of my important free decisions are not a matter of chance. They are seriously reflected on, and so they are determined by other reasons, in other words, other information which is stored in my memory and which is, interacting with the thing I'm deliberating about. So you see?
Yeah, I see. We had this talk already.
Okay.
And
I did not convince you.
Yeah, you did not convince me because it's not like we know how the brain functions and it's all, how do I say, in its completeness. We know basically not that much about our brains. We do know a lot, but still,
that's absolutely
there are
true.
so many
Absolutely, yes.
blanks.
Yeah, true.
Knowledges.
That's true. Yeah.
So
Still, I will just say my argument that from a certain point of view, you can say that the undetermined brain is delirious because it goes on all sides. But okay, I agree that this is certainly not a final argument. Let us look a little bit deeper, and then we go on to consciousness. But let us look at one example. For instance, when you took the decision to come to this course, would you consider that as a free decision? Maybe Miss here on the first row.
Well, I think that it was a free decision because I wasn't obliged and I don't have any assessments of like papers or something I should do. And I was just interested in the topic, so I decided to come. It is also a little bit connected maybe with things that I am majoring here in sense.
So you are interested in it, right? So could it be that this interest, together with the fact that, together with other reasons, for instance, the fact that you didn't have much to do tonight, maybe because one of the your friends came to this course, could it be that all these reasons together made you come to this course? Does that sound like a reasonable assumption to you? Or do you think there is something in your brain, a mind, which, you know, a little bit floats above the different neural processes, and we said, no, I choose as a free being?
Yes, I guess my brain just identifies the name of the course, like, and it seems familiar, maybe, to my brain, and something like that.
Okay, so you're also on the libertarian side?
Not sure.
Okay. Difficult debate. And we will not, you know, end it today, but just to summarize once more the main ideas of the book, the first chapter by Griffith. So the problem of free will is, consists of two parts. The first is, do we have free will? The second is, if yes, what is it and what is the definition? And there are a whole bunch of theories on the market. As I said, some people think that free will is just an illusion. Maybe all the choices you made, for instance, to come to this course, since it is an event in your brain, can be explained by some reasons. For instance, certain desires, certain circumstances. And these reasons, they cause your decision. These explaining phenomena, these preceding causes, they have causes in turn which precede them, and so on until you go to a time before your birth even. That is at least what determinists say. And then, of course, these people, they wonder, well, if that would be the case, then it seems that free will is an illusion.
May I interrupt you?
Yes?
I have a short question.
Yes?
What is your opinion? Are you
So the question is, what is your opinion on this?
Thank you very much for this question, and that's my next slide. So some people determine this. They say, well, maybe, every choice has causes which existed before I made the so-called free decision, and these causes had another cause, and so on. And so you go back to a time even before you were born, and then it looks as if my choices are not up to me. In other words, I do not have free will. But other people say, well, there is a serious mistake in your reasoning. For instance, because maybe the universe is not deterministic. Quantum physicists, they believe that the universe is not deterministic. And that would, for instance, explain why not every mental event is caused by other events, such as desired circumstances. Maybe our choices are, after all, uncaused, or in other words, spontaneous. And that is probably what most people think, okay? Let us face it, this idea that things would be determined and have preceding causes which go back, in the most extreme case, to the Big Bang, is a flabbergasting idea. And that brings us then to this final classification between the most important schools. So on the one hand, we have libertarians, and they say that we have free will and determinism is wrong. Then we have the opposing school, which are the hard determinists. Everything is determined and we have no free will. And in between, there is a school which is called the school of compatibilism. They say actually determinism and free will are not really in contradiction. Both can exist at the same time. Now that looks a little bit like a philosophical, clever trick, because you could say, well, if determinism really exists, And if really every choice or decision or thought you have popping up in your brain had to arrive due to a chain of necessitating causes going back to the Big Bang, if that really would be true, well, then I cannot really choose. Then there is only one thing that I can choose, and where would be free will? Okay, so how can compatibilists claim that determinism would be compatible, would be able to go hand in hand with free will? If this is true, then you know there is only one thing, then everything that happens is the only thing that could happen, and it had to happen in view of all the preceding events. So, you know, this compatibilist school, they may be accused of being philosophical sophists, but things are not as simple, of course. They have good reasons to say, actually, it is possible that the world is deterministic, and we still have free will, but we have then to understand free will in a different way as the capacity to do otherwise. Okay, one popular definition of free will for libertarians is saying that free will is a capacity to do otherwise, to choose something, but to be able to have a series of options in front of you. Compatibilists say, no, 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 that is the wrong definition of free will, because we believe in determinism, but we also believe in free will. That means then that I have to find another definition of what is free will. Okay? And there are whole books, there are libraries full written on what then exactly free will would be. Actually, the theory on free will that has been developed in our school by myself and Tomasz Bluzevic is in this category. Okay, I will say something more on it in a moment. I would like to end this brief introduction into free will by saying that this topic is very important for society. Has anyone an idea why this could be the case? Why is it important to, I see a finger there, yes? Please, the microphone.
Okay, thank you. My name is Matthew, and I believe that free will is something that helps us to create some great things. Because, well, if the world is
determined,
if the world is determined, well, then it seems like we have a chance to create something great, create something new, and if the person believes that she or he has a free will, then he believes that he is able to create his or her life by his own. And I think it helps to be more motivated, to be more
satisfied?
To be more confident about your about what you're doing. Well, I don't take some people like criminals or something, but when you are great, I don't know, great businessman or scientist or whatever, and you believe in what you are doing, well, I think you can create much more and much greater things than if you think like, well, what can I do? The world is determined, and just I'm doing well. Just I am going to stay in my comfort zone and do nothing.
Thank you very much. Well, I think that many people think like you. On the other hand, one could say, well, there are people who believe in determinism, such as Einstein, and they did do a few nice things, right? So I think, to be honest, that you can be a determinist and still feel very free. This idea of determinism is a purely theoretical idea. But before I go on, Are there some other people who wanted to say something? Yes. Can we give the microphone here, please?
Like the notion of free will is important for our society because it solves like the question of responsibility. Because if there is no free will, there is no responsibility. And
exactly.
And there emerge legal problems because we cannot
we cannot really punish someone if determinism would be true. How could we hold someone responsible for something because what he did was the thing he had to do anyways, and it was written in the stars 14 billion years ago.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. That is the thing I wanted to hear. So I personally do believe that, you know, this question of free will has a big importance for society, for our legal system. We cannot do that today. This is another course, but I think that this notion of free will, that we should rethink that we are here a new generation, or you are a new generation of scholars, and I claim that we should carefully look again at notions such as guilt, sin, blame, praise, punishment, merit, accomplishment. As a former student said, we should reevaluate these. These things are much more complex than meets the eye. That is what I personally think, okay? And one of the reasons is exactly as, I forgot your name, you just said. But we will not do that today, ladies and gentlemen. That's going to be the topic of another course. I already showed this. I will now end this mini chapter on free will with referring you to the model that we developed here at SAS, which we call the Cmt model. That will become clear later where this name comes from. And actually, this is a simple synthetic model. We simply define, according to the tools of analytic philosophy, what is our definition of a free act or an act of free will. And it's very simple, this model. It says that, well, there are two conditions which need to be satisfied for a free act. First of all, it should not be compelled by a third party, by an external agent, nor by a pathological compulsion, an illness. So that's very simple. It says that the first thing in order to call an act a free act is that you should not be forced to do it. Seems a pretty simple thing, but the second condition is even more important. And according to this model, the model is more elaborated than that, and in the seminar on Friday we will look in more detail to it. The second condition for a free act, according to the Cmt model of free will, is that the act should be conscious. So I'm only showing you this slide to explain how we turn from studying free will to studying consciousness. For the Cmt school of free will, consciousness is the key ingredient, or the less obvious ingredient, of free will, okay? You can say a free act is an act that is conscious and not compelled. So if someone puts a gun on your head and said, press that button, then is this a free act, Yegor? No, because it is compelled. If, so that was a simple question. So I just note that this is a compatibilist position, because this definition of free will works even if the universe would be totally deterministic. If I do things which are, known by God, if he or she exists, so if there is a superior intelligence which can predict what I'm going to do, or if there are very powerful fMRI machines which can predict what I'm going to do, even if I'm not aware of it. So if the world would be deterministic, then I can still be free, because if there is no one forcing me, if there is no third person, compelling me to do it, and if I'm conscious about what's happening, then it is a free act according to this model, right? So that is why this is a compatibilist theory. Is that clear? That even that this model, that this definition of free will, can be upheld, can be kept, even if the world is deterministic. Sophia, is that clear? Yes? Any questions about that? Okay. Remind me, please, your first name? Julie.
I wanted to ask about how can this theory fit in the group of three if they both have free will as something else. If they have just another definition, how it can be in the same line.
I don't understand the question. Which three schools are you talking about? Determinists, compatibilists, and libertarians?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I mean, in libertarian, as I understood, maybe I misunderstood. Libertarians and determinists have free will in more of the same way. And
No. Determinists, they do not. The hard determinists, they do not believe that free will exists.
Yes.
Okay.
I just thought it's too different from what libertarians have, and that's.
It's the opposite of libertarians. Libertarians say free will exists and the world, the universe is not deterministic. So it's the opposite, right? Libertarians and determinists are really not agreeing on anything.
I just first thought that they have the same definition of free will.
No.
Sorry then.
Well. Actually, you're right. They have the same definition. So you can say that both schools have have the following definition: that free will is the capacity to make genuine choices, meaning that you can choose A, but you could choose something else too. The difference between the two schools is that libertarians say, yeah, that exists, that capacity. I have that capacity. I can choose now this, but I would have chosen something else at exactly that time. Determinists say, no. Free will does not exist because everything you do, that's the only thing you could do, because it has been determined by things, by events in your past.
So it's only a psychological thing for both of them, or for determinists, right?
Yeah, it's a kind of illusion. It's a feeling we have. Determinists say, well, yeah, we feel free, but if you look deeper into things, then you come to a different conclusion. Compatibilists, that's a different story. They say, well, it may very well be possible that the world is deterministic. But at the same time, it makes sense to keep this notion of free will, for instance, because our whole legal system is based on the assumption of free will. If there would be no free human beings, then how can we hold someone responsible for something, right? I stick to this notion of free will. You can call it for pragmatic reasons. It's very difficult to keep a system of, let's say, you can call it correction of people, punishment, if you like. Well, there is absolutely no form of free will. I think it makes sense, but sometimes I hesitate. Sometimes I think that it would be better to totally relinquish this notion of free will. And in a certain way, the Cmt model, it does relinquish. We'll come back to that later. But I think it makes sense to keep this notion of free will, but in a compatibilist way. Okay? That means that if you judge an act, or if you look, for instance, at the legal or moral aspects of an act, you have to take into account both this definition here. You can ask, well, was this person really conscious when he or she did the morally bad act, for instance? And was he or she compelled or not? If the answer to these questions, well, if the person was conscious when he or she did it, and when the person was not compelled, then this was, according to this definition, a free act. So then the person is also morally responsible, and if the deed was wrong, he or she deserves some form of punishment. But as a determinist, you immediately add, but a mild punishment, because deep down, the person could not do otherwise. So this is very subtle, ladies and gentlemen. We can discuss that in the next course much more deeply. For now, the only thing you should know is that according to the model we are working on here, consciousness is a key ingredient of free will. Okay? By the way, some of you might notice that this definition here of free will is also compatible with an indeterminist view of the world. Even if quantum mechanics would be the ultimate truth, and if the world would really be probabilistic, that all the events in the brain, the currents which make the neurons work, if they would be probabilistic systems, well, even in that case, you can still judge whether an act is free or not by using this definition here. You can still wonder whether, you can still ask or investigate whether the act was compelled and whether the agent was conscious when he did it. Okay, so this question of determinism and indeterminism, maybe it is not that important for the question of free will after all. Any questions? If not, then we move on to what we are here for, namely some theories of consciousness. And we continue now with a few chapters which are, I would call them philosophy proper. So actually, I will follow here the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on the concept of consciousness, okay? Robert Van Gulik is a philosopher from Syracuse University, and he has made a nice overview of the different theories and the most important concepts. I will follow that for the rest of this class. There's another entry in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on the neuroscience of consciousness, but I will not use that. So Mr. Van Gulik starts his entry on consciousness with the following quote, and can someone please read that? Who would like to read? What's your name again?
My name is Matthew. Okay, I'll try. Perhaps no aspect of mind is more familiar or more puzzling than consciousness and our conscious experience of self and world. The problem of consciousness is arguably the central issue in current theorizing about the mind. Despite the lack of any agreed upon theory of consciousness, there is a widespread, if less than universal, consensus that an
adequate
account of mind requires a clear understanding of it and its place in nature. We need to understand both what consciousness is and how it relates to other and unconscious aspects of our reality.
Спасибо большое, Matvey. So, what Van Gulik is saying here is, among other things, that consciousness is one of the key features, and maybe the key feature of the mind. If you want to understand the mind, we need to understand what is consciousness. And don't forget that I ask you to, from now on, do some creative thinking yourself and try to make out for yourself in your free time, when you have nothing else to do, what you think is consciousness, okay? You may come up with a beautiful theory, and you may even become part of the free will team and publish something with us. That was a bad joke. But no, actually it's not a joke. We are serious about that. And the other question you remember is what do you think is advanced intelligence? What is real cognition? Cognition means basically thinking, okay? If you would be able to invent a computer that is more powerful than those that exist, what do you think is a lacking feature? What is, or what are the capacities that it should improve on? It can already do some things better than us, right? It can calculate much faster, it can store much more information, and so on. And yet most computers are artificial intelligence systems that do not pass this Turing test. If you ask them questions, they easily, fail. And one of the theses of our research team is that consciousness and cognition, thinking and intelligence are actually strongly related. Okay, I will try to convince you of that in this course. So before going to Mr. Van Gulik's definitions, I would like to give you a quick overview, which I gave in another talk to prospective students. So this is very light, and this is not according to all philosophical standards, but since I'm also a physicist, I feel pretty free, to keep a certain distance from philosophy and be a little bit more critical sometimes than many professional philosophers used to do. That gives me a pleasant feeling of liberty, actually, even if, as I said before, free will might be an illusion. It's a pleasant illusion. What is consciousness? Very quickly, in a few slides, I think it's useful to distinguish two types of consciousness. The one, I would call it phenomenal or experiential or subjective consciousness, and famous names of present-day philosophy or modern times philosophy are Nagel and Chalmers. They are proponents of this view of consciousness. And here is a famous quote by Nagel from 1974, and it says, "An organism has conscious mental states even only if there is something that it is like to be that organism, something that it is like for the organism." Does that ring many bells here? This is very famous in modern analytic philosophy. What do you believe that Mr. Nagel might mean here with this quote? Anyone has an idea? It's far from obvious.
Yeah, it's complicated, so I'm not sure at all. But to me it sounds that he says there is a consciousness in something if it's something can experience being. Sorry, it sounds.
I think you're actually getting quite warm. Please note that it's very important to add here something that it is like to be that organism for the organism, right?
Yeah.
Because if you would leave out that part, then everything would be conscious. Then even a stone would be conscious, because there is something that it is like to be a stone, right? A stone has certain properties. So
if that stone feels that it is a stone, at least feels something at all, has any experiences.
I think you're exactly on the right spot, Igor. Congrats. That's how I interpret this too. So this links consciousness strongly to feelings, right?
Yeah.
Have you been in a previous class? Or did you find this explanation yourself?
I guess I was in previous class, but I think it's my interpretation.
Yeah, I think so too, because I never taught this in any elective. So yeah, I think you absolutely hit the spot. I think that this school of thought, links consciousness to feelings, to having feelings. Okay, and actually, Nagel, he is famous for stating that in this sense, a bat is is conscious because, you know, it has certain sensations, it can feel something, and therefore it is conscious. There is something like to be a bat, there is something, you know, like to well, a bat can, through echolocation, for instance, sense its environment, and therefore it feels in that sense, and therefore it is conscious according to this definition. So this is one school of thought, and oh yes, I tried to translate this phrase, what it is like in different languages. In French, it is more or less, you know, translatable, the English to French. So there is something that it is like to be that organism. Il y a quelque chose que c'est que d'être cet organisme. That sounds more or less acceptable. In German, es gibt etwas, wie es ist, diese Organismus zu sein. I think that Germans would think that this is totally wrong English, German. And in Russian, if my Google translator is correct, it would be this here. Does that make sense in Russian? Jest что-то, что похоже на то, чтобы быть этим организмом. Is that good Russian or not?
Sounds about right.
Really? In English, I have to admit, I found it a little bit vague, okay? And maybe in Russian too, that you will judge yourself. So, as Yegor said, this school of thought, and we will come back to it in more detail in a moment, associates consciousness with the capacity to sense, to have sensations, in other words, to be able to use the senses, right? And from that point of view, even a bat is conscious because it can sense its environment, maybe or probably in another way than we do it. It uses, for instance, not eyesight, but it uses ultrasounds which reflect on obstacles, and with these reflected sound waves, it can locate itself in 3D. This is called echolocation. This is a form of sensing, and according to Nagel, therefore the bat is conscious. Now this may be a type of consciousness. I will not deny that, or we will not contest it, but as you remember, we are in this research team more interested in consciousness which could be implemented in computers and AI systems. Therefore, we are looking more to, let's call it, rational consciousness, because this sense-based or feeling-based consciousness seems very difficult to implement, at least at the present stage of technology, in robots and computers. What do you think would be needed in order to be able to do that? Do you think that what kind of technological means is needed? I see here a few computer scientists, Vladislav or Arseny. What do you guys think? Do you think that we can make soon robots that can think, that can feel, that have feelings?
Yeah, so as far as I'm concerned, we humans have only 5 beings, so we are, at this moment of time, we are capable of using different sensors which can, let's say, emulate different senses. So it is possible to create thermal sensor or the sensor that would sense light and emulate some sort of feelings. So I think even now it is to date it's possible to emulate feelings of human beings. So if we follow this definition, we are able to emulate consciousness right now.
Other opinions?
Well, I'm not really agree with my colleague who said his opinion,
Because firstly, I cannot say that feels and senses are equal things. And my second argument is that, so I'm not really fully agree with this explanation of consciousness, because I would say that consciousness, it is not only how it feels, but how you experience these feels. So the fact of experiencing and understanding of all the feels is also important for consciousness, to tell that it is consciousness. So I think it makes even harder to implement all of this in computer and robot science.
Excellent answer. But there are some other people. I will comment on Arseny too. Matthew?
Well, it's not like truly opinion, it's like some a bit notice. Well, is feelings something we feel well in our brains, like closed? Can someone tell what the person really feels?
I think that there are some people who did some neuroscience, maybe Milana or Yegor.
Well, the thing I am trying to say that how we can really check if the robot feels or not. If we can't say what person feels, like really feels in our life. Well, maybe neurobiologists have some definition, but I...
Okay, let me try a quick answer, then we can see if we understand each other. Well, I think we can all agree that, to feel pain is something that, we all can, right? So this kinds of immediate sense experiences we all have, and we don't need to doubt it. If, of course, we're talking about feelings as love or hatred and so on, that is a much more complicated thing, and that is what, I forgot your, Paulina? Angelina, right? What Angelina pointed to, that, these are interpreted sensations, okay? And that is much more complex. There are, without any doubt, a whole lot of neural circuits involved in, the linking of concepts to feelings. There are also feelings involved, for instance, in, let's say, love, because, you can even sometimes feel it in your stomach. So this is an extremely complex thing. And you're right, and Angelina too, to notice that that is difficult to describe in detail, so it will be very difficult to implement it in robots. So from that point of view, I think that Angelina has an interesting point. At the same time, Arseny is also proposing something interesting. If we, ultimately the first stage of, let's say, feelings is the raw sense impression, and in principle we could make sensors, for instance, which can feel heat or which can register, let's say, when a needle is pricked into the computer, we feel pain. There is a neural circuit in our brain telling us, hey, this is not good, this hurts. But in principle, this, let's say, the physically most obvious aspects of senses can be, captured by technological sensors. So the first stage in, implementing in robots and machines sensations, the first most physical stage, that is in principle possible. But then comes the whole thing, which are, the sentiments, which are such as love, hatred, and so on, which involve more than purely physical, than purely bodily signals, right? And therefore, that's exactly what I think Angelina pointed to, and that is what I wrote here too. If feelings are the essence of consciousness, it will be difficult, but not impossible, to implement it in robots. At least at the present stage of technology, we are far from that. That is why in our team, we look to a different base category of consciousness, which you can call cognitive consciousness, consciousness related to thinking. And we are here in a school of thought, as I will explain you in the next lecture. We are pretty close to thinkers such as David Rosenthal, Daniel Dennett, Stanislas Dehaene, and many, many more. And for those researchers, consciousness is intimately related to cognitive awareness, you might call it, and we will look in more detail at that soon. So in other words, well, here is a key idea of this school of thought. It says that I'm conscious of an act or a thought if I think about it. And I will explain that in more detail. Much more can be said about it, but very roughly, this links consciousness to understanding, and that means that there is, you're conscious about a thought or a feeling if you're thinking about it, to put it simply. So this links consciousness to rationality, to cognitive functions, and that is more interesting for us. If you want to implement it in computers, that will be easier than the phenomenal consciousness that we spoke about in that, for instance, Chalmers and Nagel are considering to be the essence of consciousness. Let us now go to Van Gulik. He starts, or one of his entries is making distinction between creature consciousness and state consciousness. That's a distinction which is originally due to David Rosenthal. Creature consciousness is, the consciousness, or, well, if you study what are the properties of a human being or of a creature in general to deserve to call it conscious. So creature consciousness are all the properties that a creature should satisfy to be conscious. State consciousness is dealing with the question which type of mental states are conscious. There are different mental states, and according to certain criteria, you can call those states conscious. So that is the difference between creature consciousness and state consciousness. This is, to a certain degree, a somewhat superficial distinction. Why? Because you could say that, well, you can call a creature conscious if it possesses, if it has a certain series of state consciousness. So basically you could characterize creature consciousness by listing all the types of states that the creature should have to count as conscious. So actually these two concepts, state consciousness and state consciousness, creature consciousness and state consciousness, they overlap, but it still makes sense to disentangle them. So let us start with the different philosophical positions on creature consciousness. So an animal, a person, or other cognitive system may be regarded as conscious in a number of different meanings. And the simplest, or the first, is the feature, the property of sentience. It may be conscious in the generic sense of simply being a sentient creature, one capable of sensing and responding to its world. Being conscious in this sense may admit of degrees, and just what sort of sensory capacities or sufficiency may not be sharply defined. Are fish conscious in the relevant respect, and what of shrimps or beasts? So basically, according to this position, a creature is conscious if it has the capacity of sentience, if it can feel. Now, we are not only philosophers in this school, we also do some science, and therefore I think we can answer this question. Do you think that a shrimp has sentience, Julia? Yes.
I have no idea what shrimp thinks about, so
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Madhve. Do you think that a fish can feel?
Well, most likely they can. At least they can feel pain, and they are most likely to feel some kind of happiness or sadness.
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I agree that they can feel pain. That's not so easy to guess because they react if you prick a needle in them, then they react in a way which certainly suggests that they can feel something, and that is something that they don't like because they avoid it. The other question, whether they can feel sadness or happiness, that's an extremely interesting one, and I think it can actually be studied. What do you guys think? Are you, when you observe your dog or cat, do you think that it shows sometimes happiness or sadness? Arseny? Okay.
So I think I have more of a Cartesian view on this because I have heard that dogs actually don't really feel sadness. So you know that look the dogs give you when you punish them for doing something bad, like I don't know, pooping somewhere on the floor in the kitchen. So they don't really feel sad. They actually it's their defense mechanism. So it's like evolutionary. Dogs evolved to express sadness, so the humans won't punish them as bad. So actually they don't really feel sad, they just want to be safe from your outrage, and so they don't really feel sadness. But when you walk your dog, you can see that it is being happy, so maybe there is some, maybe they have some kinds of emotions or feelings.
Mm-hmm. Other people, what do you think of it?
I think maybe cats can be jealous in some moments, and we can see it, and it's really hard emotion, I think. It's not like happiness, sadness, and maybe some mother instincts, they can feel them, because some cats, like Egypt's Sphinx cats, they, after maybe killing their kittens, they're very hard aggressive after that, and I think that's some part of hard feelings produced by some emotions.
Mm-hmm. I think so too. Someone else wants to say something or has experience on that? Matthew?
Okay, I just wanted to say that, well, as Arseny says and Andrei says, cats and dogs can feel sad, can show their feeling sadness to, for example, to get less serious punishment, and this is their instincts or something natural, mother instincts. But I just think that the same, a bit hard, a bit complicated, of course, but the same about humans, isn't it? Like we feel sad to be to have we can feel sad or anxious to get some reaction from other people. I mean, we feel sad for someone says us, well, it's okay to get to feel feel a bit better. That's what I wanted to say.
True, Matvey, but actually the question right now was simpler. Yeah, we know that we humans, we can have feelings, and we also, you know, I agree actually with the people who think that animals have feelings. I think that I've observed occasions where you could clearly see that when, for instance, the boss of a dog was sick or dying, that the dog was behaving in a much less lively way, in a way, much less happy way than it usually did, and so on and so forth. There are really, you know, cases where, for me, the similarity is pretty obvious. But one could, I think that one could study that. Okay. Second school on what is consciousness, what is the consciousness of a creature, is wakefulness, okay? That simply says that one might count an organism as conscious only if it were awake and normally alert. In that sense, organisms would not count as conscious when asleep or in any of the deeper levels of coma. Again, boundaries may be blurry and intermediate cases may be involved. For example, is one conscious in the relevant sense when dreaming or hypnotized? Well, that is a very simple definition of consciousness. That simply, you know, relates consciousness to being awake or not. For the moment, let us just go over the different schools, and then later we will see what we here in Tumen think of it. But I think it is almost time. No, it is it? 3 minutes? Okay, then I think that I will leave it here for today. Thank you for your attention. Please do not forget to fill in the famous sheet, and see you Thursday evening for the next lesson.